Forced to marry a stranger, he swore he'd never love her, until her secret changed everything. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories that touch the heart. Your support truly means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's return to our main character. The wedding hall was quiet. Golden light from the chandeliers spilled across polished marble floors, and a soft piano melody floated through the air like a heartbeat trying to stay steady. Ethan Cole stood beside his bride, perfectly tailored in a black tuxedo, his jaw set like stone. Across from him, Maya Lopez trembled under layers of white lace. A single tear rolled down her cheek, catching the light before it fell. He lifted his hand, brushed her chin gently, and whispered, "You do not have to cry. It is only 6 months." But she could not stop. Because for her, this was not just a contract, it was survival. 2 weeks earlier, Maya was standing behind the checkout counter at a grocery store in downtown Chicago. The hum of scanners, the smell of coffee from the small machine near aisle 4, and the flicker of broken fluorescent lights were the rhythm of her life. Her paycheck barely covered rent and her mother's medical bills. Still, she smiled at every customer, pretending not to feel the exhaustion that pulled at her bones. That night, as rain lashed against the glass doors, she noticed a man leaning on the counter, pale and disoriented. "Sir, are you all right?" she asked. He looked at her like someone who had forgotten how to breathe. Seconds later, he collapsed. She rushed to call 911, stayed by his side, pressing a trembling hand on his shoulder until the ambulance arrived. She did not know that the man she saved was one of the city's youngest millionaires, a brilliant but broken stockbroker named Ethan Cole. When he woke up in the hospital the next morning, he remembered her face, the kindness in her eyes, the way she stayed even when the rain was flooding the street. No cameras, no motive, just kindness. But Ethan's world was not one of gratitude. It was contracts, shareholders, and deadlines. His late father's will demanded that he marry before turning 33 or lose control of the entire company. He had 2 months left. His lawyer suggested a solution, a marriage on paper, simple and clean. No emotions, no attachment, only signatures. When the lawyer showed him Maya's file, the girl from the grocery store, Ethan hesitated. "She is ordinary," he said quietly. "That is exactly why this will work," the lawyer replied. "She has nothing to gain from pretending." Maya did not want to believe the offer was real. $100,000 for 6 months of a fake marriage? It sounded like a scam. But when she saw her mother's hospital invoice lying unpaid on the table, she folded the paper in silence. The next morning, she walked into Kohl's Securities in her worn-out sneakers and said softly, "I will do it." Ethan looked at her across the mahogany desk, expression unreadable. "Then we have a deal," he said, sliding the contract toward her. She took the pen, her hand shaking as she signed. He added one last condition in his calm, detached voice. "No love. No pretending outside public events. We smile for the cameras, nothing more." Maya nodded. "Do not worry," she replied. "I stopped believing in love a long time ago." And now, under the golden light of their wedding, surrounded by strangers in designer suits, the first chapter of their 6-month lie began. Ethan adjusted her veil, his voice low enough for her alone. "After tonight, just follow my lead." Maya swallowed hard, looked up and whispered, "I always do, Mr. Cole." "Loln," the priest's voice echoed, distant yet binding. For better or for worse. Neither of them knew that this contract, built on lies, would uncover a truth powerful enough to change both of their lives forever. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the tall windows of the Cole mansion, turning the marble floor into a mirror of gold. Maya walked carefully, her reflection following like a stranger she barely recognized. The wedding had ended only hours ago, but the silence of the house made it feel like a dream she could not wake from. Ethan's assistant, a stern woman named Mrs. Lawson, guided her through the endless corridors. "Mr. Cole prefers breakfast at 7 sharp. You will find coffee in the study if you wish," she said, without meeting Maya's eyes. Maya nodded, clutching her small purse, the same one she had carried at the grocery store every day. Inside it were 2 things that still grounded her in reality: her mother's old rosary and a folded hospital receipt marked paid. She stepped into the study, a room that smelled of cedar and old paper. Ethan was already there, dressed in a charcoal suit, his posture flawless as he read financial reports. He looked up briefly. "You are awake," he said flatly. Yes, Maya answered. Her voice was soft but steady. There is a schedule on the desk. You will accompany me to 3 events this week, 2 charity dinners and a corporate gala. Our marriage is now public. From this point, you represent the Cole family. She hesitated. I am not sure I know how to represent anyone. He finally looked at her, eyes cool but not unkind. Just smile when people talk to you. That is all this world ever expects. Maya sat opposite him, pouring coffee from the silver pot. Her hands trembled slightly, and a few drops fell onto the tablecloth. Ethan did not react, only continued reading. The silence stretched, heavy with unspoken thoughts. Later that day, a car arrived to take her to fittings and lessons how to walk, how to hold a glass, how to speak without revealing nerves. The stylist pinned her hair up, adjusted the hem of her dress, and whispered, "You will do fine, sweetheart. Men like him do not notice details, only outcomes." Tamal. That night, she stood on the balcony, the city lights of Chicago glittering below like a sea of stars. She thought of her mother and whispered into the wind, "I hope this lie buys you peace." Inside the mansion, Ethan sat at his piano playing slow, unfamiliar chords. He did not notice Maya watching from the hallway, barefoot, her wedding ring glinting under the dim light. For a moment, he looked less like a millionaire and more like a man who had forgotten how to be human. The days blurred into routine. Every morning she placed a cup of cheap instant coffee outside his office door, the same kind she had made for herself at the grocery store. At first he ignored it. Then one day, he took a sip. He found her later in the kitchen, drying dishes with the housekeeper. "You made this coffee?" he asked. "Yes. It is not fancy, but it helps when mornings feel too long." He nodded once. "It is better than I expected." That was the closest thing to a compliment she had received from him. At the first charity event, photographers swarmed as they stepped from the car. Ethan offered his arm, and she took it. Flashbulbs burst like lightning. To the cameras, they looked perfect, tall, graceful, the ideal couple. But when the reporters asked how they met, Maya froze. Ethan smoothly replied, "We met at a coffee shop. She spilled her drink on me. I suppose I never recovered. Didn't you?" Everyone laughed, and Maya forced a smile, wondering if he meant the joke or the irony. Later, at the gala's after-party, a wealthy investor named Richard Crane leaned close and sneered. "I heard your wife used to bag groceries. Quite a rise in the market, huh?" Maya's cheeks burned, but before she could answer, Ethan turned his gaze on the man, sharp, measured. "Careful, Richard," he said calmly. "You are speaking to Mrs. Cole." The investor laughed awkwardly, then retreated. On the drive home, Maya whispered, "You did not have to defend me." Ethan's eyes stayed on the road. It was necessary. Appearances matter. She turned toward the window, hiding a small smile. "Maybe to you." Weeks passed. The distance between them began to shift like ice cracking, slowly but undeniably. She found him working late, asleep on his desk, surrounded by charts and numbers. Gently, she placed a blanket over his shoulders. He stirred, half asleep. "You should not care," he murmured. "I know," she said softly, "but I do." In that quiet moment, something inside him faltered. The walls he had built, the rules he had written, began to blur. But every story built on pretense carries a fault line waiting to break. The closer they grew, the more fragile their secret became. Because somewhere out there, someone had discovered the truth about their contract and was ready to use it against them. The tension began quietly, like a faint crack in glass. It started with a rumor, whispered through the polished halls of Cole Securities. Someone had leaked a photo of Ethan and Maya leaving a charity event hand in hand. The headline read, "Millionaire marries grocery clerk, but what is he hiding?" Inside the company boardroom, Ethan's executives stared at the projection screen, waiting for his reaction. He stood at the head of the table, expression unreadable. "Damage control," he said finally. "Handle the press before the markets open." A younger partner spoke nervously. "Sir, there are also questions about Mrs. Cole's background. Some claim she had access to client files through her position at the supermarket data system." Ethan's jaw tightened. "That is absurd." But when the partner slid a printed report across the table, a list of suspicious logins traced to Maya's name, his stomach turned cold. That night, when he returned home, the mansion felt heavier than usual. Maya was arranging flowers in the foyer, the scent of lilies filling the air. He watched her silently for a moment before speaking. "Someone has accused you of leaking company information." She looked up, startled. "What? I would never, Ethan. I do not even understand how your systems work." He cut her off, voice clipped. Do you have any connection to anyone inside my company? No. Why would you think that? Because this is not just about me anymore. It is about my father's legacy. About everything I built. Her face paled. I thought this was about helping each other. His tone turned sharp. It was business. You of all people should remember that. The words struck harder than he intended. She stepped back, clutching her hands. I saved your life once, she whispered. But maybe that was a mistake. She left the room without another word. Ethan spent the next day in his office, replaying her voice in his mind. Still, logic drowned out emotion. He called his security team and ordered a full background check. By nightfall, the report was on his desk. It showed multiple payments sent from an anonymous account to Maya's name fund transfers that looked like bribes. Ethan stared at the papers until the lines blurred. The rational part of him said it was proof. The human part whispered it was wrong. When he went upstairs, Maya was packing her small suitcase. You already decided I am guilty, she said softly, not looking at him. I just need answers, he replied. You want answers? Fine. I took the money, but not for me. Ethan froze. Then for who? For the people at the grocery store. They were going to lose their jobs when your company bought the chain. I paid their rent for 2 months. Her voice broke. You said numbers are all that matter. I just tried to save people behind those numbers. He felt something inside him twist. But pride spoke louder than pain. You should have come to me. You never would have listened, she said. The next sound was the soft click of the suitcase closing. Rain fell hard outside as she walked out of the mansion. Ethan stood by the window, watching her disappear into the storm. On the table behind him lay the contract they had signed months ago, edges soaked from his wet hands. The ink had started to smear. For days, the house was silent. Ethan tried to drown himself in work, but nothing felt solid anymore. Every room reminded him of her laughter, her coffee cup, the faint smell of lilies she had left behind. He found himself replaying her words again and again. I saved your life once. One evening, while sorting old files, he noticed something strange. The anonymous payments that had been traced to Maya's account came from a fund connected to one of his senior managers, Richard Crane, the same man who had mocked her at the gala. Ethan called his lawyer immediately. Recheck the source of those transfers, he ordered. An hour later, the truth came out. Crane had used Maya's name to hide his embezzlement. She had been innocent all along. Ethan's chest tightened with guilt. The realization hit like a blow. He had destroyed the only genuine thing that had ever entered his carefully controlled life. The next morning, he drove through the city until he reached a small community center on the south side. A faded sign read Heart Foundation, food for families in need. Inside, he found her. Maya was serving soup to a line of workers and elderly people, wearing a simple sweater and the same warm smile she once gave to strangers at the grocery store. When she saw him, her expression faltered but did not soften. He stepped closer, voice shaking. The accusations were false. Richard Crane set you up. He has been arrested. She nodded, eyes glistening. Good. I am glad the truth came out. He swallowed hard. Maya, I was wrong about you. About everything. Her voice was calm. You were right about one thing, Ethan. It was just business. But sometimes, business teaches us what real loss feels like. Choose her. She turned back to serve the next person, leaving him standing there, surrounded by people she had chosen to help instead of hate. That night, for the first time in years, Ethan Cole walked home without a driver, without a plan, and without a shield. The city lights blurred in the rain, and he finally understood what it meant to have everything and feel absolutely nothing. Somewhere deep inside, he knew he would have to earn her forgiveness. But first, he would have to learn how to be human again. A week passed before Ethan found the courage to return to the community center. Each night he stood outside in his car, watching through the glass windows as Maya served food, laughed with the volunteers, and comforted strangers like old friends. She seemed lighter without him, free in a way he had never been. Inside the mansion, his world felt hollow. The housekeeper had stopped leaving 2 cups on the table. The piano was covered with dust. The once immaculate space now looked like a museum of everything he had lost. One evening, Ethan sat at his desk and pulled out the same contract that had started it all. The paper was wrinkled, the ink faded from the rain. At the bottom of the page, beside Maya's signature, he noticed something he had never paid attention to before, a handwritten line she had added quietly the day they signed. It read, "Every promise means something, even the fake ones. Ye won." He closed his eyes, and for the first time, tears filled them. The next morning, he met with his lawyer. "I want to dissolve the marriage legally. Ethan said. The lawyer looked surprised. Are you certain? You could just let it expire in 2 weeks? Ethan shook his head. No. She deserves to be free, not forgotten. He signed the final papers, leaving his wedding ring on the desk beside them. But peace did not follow. The guilt stayed. It followed him to work, into board meetings, and even into sleep. He tried to focus on rebuilding the company's image after the scandal, but every decision felt empty. Then, one afternoon, while reviewing the quarterly charity budget, he saw a familiar name listed under new partnerships, the Heart Foundation. A donation request had arrived from Maya's organization seeking funds for a new program that provided financial literacy training to underpaid workers. Reading the proposal, Ethan realized it used simplified versions of the same stock models he had once lectured about. She had learned from him, but she was using that knowledge to teach kindness, not profit. That night, he made a decision. He personally visited the foundation's small office on the south side of the city. When he walked in, the volunteers stopped and stared. Maya looked up from her desk, startled to see him again. I am not here to interfere, he said quietly. I came to help. She hesitated. You have helped enough, Ethan. I know, he admitted, but you taught me that value is not measured by gain. I want to invest in what matters people. He placed an envelope on her desk. Inside was a single check made out to the Heart Foundation for $5 million. Maya stared at it, stunned. I cannot take this, she said. It is not charity, Ethan replied. It is repayment for everything I owe you. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Outside, the evening sun poured through the windows, painting the room in warm gold. Ethan turned to leave, but Maya's voice stopped him. Why now? She asked. He paused at the door. Because you were right. I spent my life trading in numbers, but you taught me that every person is a living investment, and I finally want to earn something real. He left quietly, without waiting for her answer. Days later, the foundation held a press event to announce the new partnership. Reporters filled the small hall, curious about the unusual collaboration between a corporate titan and a local charity. Ethan stood beside Maya, on stage, as cameras flashed. When a journalist asked if they were back together, Ethan smiled faintly. No, he said. We are building something better than a marriage contract. We are building trust. The crowd applauded softly, sensing the weight behind his words. After the event, as the room emptied, Maya approached him. You did not have to do all this, she said. I know, Ethan answered, meeting her eyes. But I wanted to. For a heartbeat, the world felt still again, like the moment before a storm breaks. She reached into her bag and handed him something, a small, dented coffee cup, the same kind she used to leave outside his office. Here, she said. You always forgot to breathe. Maybe now you will remember. Ethan smiled, holding the cup carefully, as if it were made of glass. I will, he promised. And for the first time since their wedding, both of them knew this promise was real. Weeks passed, and for the first time in years, Ethan Cole began to feel a sense of peace that did not come from numbers or success. Every Friday, he volunteered quietly at the Heart Foundation, teaching simple finance lessons to single parents and young workers. He no longer wore tailored suits or gold watches. Instead, he showed up in rolled sleeves, listening more than he spoke. Maya tried to keep her distance, but she could not ignore how much he had changed. The man who once lived by contracts now spent hours explaining budgets to strangers, drinking the same cheap coffee she had once made for him. The walls around her heart started to shift, just slightly. One afternoon, as the last group of volunteers left, Maya found Ethan fixing a broken shelf in the storage room. His tie was gone, his shirt stained with dust. You are terrible with tools, she teased. He smiled. I am learning. She handed him a small screwdriver. You could have hired someone to do this. I could, he said, tightening the screw carefully. But some things are worth doing yourself. They shared a quiet laugh, the kind that felt easy, natural, human. For the first time since their marriage began, silence between them no longer felt like distance. It felt like comfort. That evening, a light rain began to fall. Maya locked up the center and turned off the lights. But when she stepped outside, Ethan was still there, standing by his car, holding an umbrella. Can I give you a ride? He asked. She hesitated, then nodded. The drive through the city was slow and calm. Streetlights shimmered on wet pavement, and for a while, neither of them spoke. Then Ethan said quietly, I never told you why I panicked that night in the grocery store. Maya glanced at him. You do not have to. I want to, he said. It was not exhaustion. It was a panic attack. My father had just passed, and the board threatened to sell everything he built. I felt like I was drowning. You were the first person who saw me as human, not a name or a fortune. His voice cracked slightly, and I repaid that kindness with suspicion. Maya stared out the window, watching the rain blur the skyline. People hurt each other when they are scared, but we heal when we start to see each other again. He nodded slowly. Then I hope you will let me try to see you clearly this time. When they reached her apartment, she turned to him, uncertain. Good night, Ethan, she said. He smiled softly. Good night, Maya. For the next few weeks, he continued visiting the foundation, not as a sponsor, but as a friend. They worked side by side, organizing donations and setting up financial workshops. Sometimes he brought lunch for the whole team. Sometimes he simply fixed broken furniture again, pretending to be bad at it just to make her laugh. Then came the night of the annual Heart Foundation Gala, the same kind of event where their story had once begun. But this time, it belonged to her. Maya wore a simple navy dress, nothing extravagant. The hall was filled with families, students, and workers whose lives had changed because of the foundation. When she stepped on stage to speak, she spotted Ethan at the back of the room. Their eyes met, and he gave a small nod. After her speech, the lights dimmed, and a screen played a short film showing the foundation's journey. The final image made everyone gasp. It was a framed photo of a small coffee cup, captioned with her handwriting, "Do not forget to breathe." When the crowd rose in applause, Ethan walked toward her. The music softened, and he held out something, a velvet box. Inside was a silver ring, simple and elegant. "Maya Lopez," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "This time, there is no contract, no rules, no timelines, just one promise. Let me love you for real." The room fell silent. Maya looked at him, her eyes shining. She reached out, placing her hand over his. "Then this time, Ethan, let us write our own terms." The audience cheered softly as he slipped the ring onto her finger. In that moment, under the lights and the quiet hum of applause, the lie that once bound them became the truth that finally set them free. And as they stood there, surrounded by people whose lives they had changed, Maya whispered, "You finally learned to breathe." Ethan smiled. "Only because you reminded me how." The following months unfolded like a quiet sunrise after a long storm. Maya and Ethan worked together every day, not as business partners but as equals. The Heart Foundation expanded quickly with new projects, scholarships, job training, and small business grants. Yet even as their success grew, both of them stayed grounded in what mattered most: people. They spent long evenings planning new programs, often in the small office that still smelled faintly of coffee and paper. Sometimes, Maya would catch Ethan staring at her across the desk, lost in thought. When she asked what he was thinking, he always gave the same answer. "How lucky I was that you sat at the wrong table," he would say softly, and she would laugh, shaking her head. One afternoon, Ethan invited her to visit his company headquarters. The boardroom that once felt cold and intimidating now looked different. On one wall, he had framed the foundation's mission statement: "Every number represents a life." "I wanted my people to see what value really means," he told her. Maya smiled. "You are turning your empire into a classroom." "Bien," he looked at her gently. "You turned me into a student." They began appearing together in interviews and community events. Reporters often asked about their unusual love story, how a millionaire stockbroker and a grocery clerk ended up changing each other's lives. Maya always answered first. "I used to think love was something you fall into," she would say. "Now I know it is something you build like trust, one choice at a time." Ethan would add quietly, "And sometimes the best deals in life are the ones you never planned." But not every day was perfect. Success brought pressure, and pressure tested patience. There were moments when their old habits returned: his instinct to control, her fear of losing herself again. One evening, after a disagreement about expanding the foundation too fast, Ethan raised his voice. "I just want to protect what we built," he said. Maya looked at him, calm but firm. "You cannot protect something by caging it, Ethan. You taught me that." He stopped, realizing she was right. He exhaled deeply. "You are the only person who can tell me no, and somehow make it sound like love." Her lips curved into a small smile. "That is because it is." Later that night, they walked home through the quiet streets of Chicago. The city lights shimmered on the wet pavement, the same streets where they had first met. Ethan reached for her hand. "You know," he said, "I used to believe that every decision had to make profit. But you made me see that the greatest gain is peace." She squeezed his hand gently. "Peace comes when you stop counting what you could lose." When they reached the apartment, she found a small box waiting on the table. Inside was a delicate silver spoon engraved with 2 words, "Our beginning." Maya recognized it immediately. It was the same spoon she had used to stir his coffee on their first morning as husband and wife. Ethan smiled. "You kept reminding me to breathe. Now it is my turn to remind you that every ending can be a beginning." Tears welled in her eyes as she whispered, "You remembered." He nodded. "I remember everything." That weekend, the 2 of them hosted a small dinner for the foundation staff. Friends, volunteers, and even a few former critics attended. Laughter filled the room, and for once, no one spoke of contracts or mergers, only stories of kindness. As the night came to an end, Ethan raised his glass. "To the woman who showed me that love is not a transaction," he said, "it is the only investment that never loses value." Maya touched her glass to his. "And to the man who proved that second chances are the best kind of profit." The room filled with gentle applause. In that moment, surrounded by people they had once been strangers to, Ethan and Maya finally understood that what began as a lie had become their greatest truth. Outside, snow began to fall softly against the city skyline, and for the first time in years, Ethan Cole and Maya Lopez were exactly where they were meant to be, home. Spring arrived in Chicago with soft rain and the scent of new beginnings. The city streets were alive again, and for the first time in a long while, so was Ethan Cole. The Heart Foundation had become more than a charity, it was a movement. Schools requested their programs, companies offered partnerships, and Ethan's old firm had adopted their ethics model. Maya watched everything with quiet pride. She loved seeing him in this new light, less like the man of numbers and more like the man of purpose. Yet part of her feared how easily success could steal him away again. One evening, after a full day of meetings, she found him sitting in the empty office, staring out the window. "You stayed late again," she said softly, placing a cup of coffee beside him. He smiled faintly. "Habit, I suppose." She sat across from him. "Ethan, do you ever worry that we will lose ourselves in all of this?" He looked at her with a small nod. "Every day, but then I remember who I am doing it with." Her heart softened, but before she could respond, his phone rang. The display showed the board chairman from Cole Securities. Ethan answered, and his face changed as he listened. When he hung up, his expression was grim. "They want me back," he said quietly. "The board voted. They want me to take over again." Maya hesitated. "And what do you want?" He looked down. "I do not know. It is everything I worked for, but it feels like a life I already left behind." She reached out, covering his hand. "Then do not go back for power. Go back if you can change it." Chapter. The following week, Ethan returned to the towering glass building that had once defined his world. The board members welcomed him with applause and polite smiles. But this time, he saw things differently. When he looked around the conference room, he no longer saw competition, he saw possibility. "I will come back," he told them, "but only if we rebuild this company with the same principles that saved me: integrity, fairness, and empathy. We will measure our success not by profit margins but by the lives we improve." There was silence, then a murmur of agreement. For the first time, his words did not sound like a speech. They sounded like a promise. When he told Maya later that evening, she listened quietly, pride shining in her eyes. "You changed the world you once tried to control," she said. He laughed gently. "No, you did. I just followed your example." Weeks turned into months. They balanced their 2 worlds, his company and her foundation, working together yet staying true to what they had built. Every Sunday morning they still visited the same corner coffee shop, sitting by the window with their old cups, talking about small things, new projects, funny stories, and sometimes just silence. One morning, as sunlight poured through the glass, Ethan reached across the table and took her hand. "Do you ever think about how unlikely this was?" he asked. Maya smiled. "All the time. But the best things in life are rarely planned." He nodded, eyes soft. "You know, I used to think love was a risk. Now I think it is the safest investment I ever made." She laughed lightly. "Then let us keep it growing." Outside, the city buzzed with life, people walking, buses rumbling, the smell of spring flowers in the air. For them, the world no longer revolved around contracts or success. It revolved around kindness, trust, and the courage to start over. And as Ethan lifted his cup in a quiet toast, he said, "To mistakes that became miracles." Maya clinked her cup against his and whispered, "To love that never needed terms." They both smiled, knowing that this time their story was not about wealth or redemption, it was about finally finding home in each other. Summer came with warmth and light, and with it, a new chapter for Maya and Ethan. The Heart Foundation had outgrown its small building, expanding into a bright new community center near Lake Michigan. It was a place filled with laughter, children's drawings on the walls, and the scent of fresh coffee that reminded them both of where their story had begun. On opening day, hundreds of people arrived to celebrate. Volunteers, families, and donors gathered under banners that read, "Hope works when people do." Ethan stood beside Maya, watching her give a speech. She spoke with calm conviction, her voice carrying through the crowd. "Kindness does not need grand gestures," she said. "It just needs action. When we act with compassion, we create a ripple that never fades." Applause filled the hall, but Ethan's attention stayed on her. He saw the same woman who once stood behind a grocery counter, the same strength in her eyes, the same heart that had rescued him from himself. Later that evening, as the guests began to leave, Maya found him in one of the classrooms, staring at a wall of photos from the foundation's history. One picture showed them together at their very first gala, awkward but smiling. Another captured him serving soup at the center, sleeves rolled up, grinning like a different man. She stood beside him quietly. "You look happy in these." "I was," he said softly. "I still am." She smiled. "It suits you." He turned to her. "You know, for years I thought success was the only way to be remembered. But now I realize legacy is not built by power. It is built by people who choose to care." Maya's eyes softened. "Then you finally learned what real wealth is?" He nodded. "Yes, you taught me that too." As they walked outside, the evening sky turned golden. The city skyline shimmered across the lake, reflecting the light of a life rebuilt. Ethan took her hand, their fingers interlocking naturally. "Do you ever wonder how different things would be if we had not met?" he asked. Maya looked out over the water. "I think fate has a strange sense of humor," she said. "But maybe every wrong turn is just a path to the right person." He smiled. "Then I am grateful for every mistake that brought me here." They sat on a bench by the water, watching the waves roll gently against the pier. For a long time they said nothing. The air was calm, filled only with the sounds of the city winding down. After a while, Ethan spoke again. "I want to ask you something." Maya turned toward him. "What is it?" He reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. Inside was a proposal draft for a new initiative, the Lopez Scholarship Fund, a program for young women working in low-wage jobs who wanted to study business and finance. "I want this to carry your name," he said, "because you are the reason I found mine." Maya blinked back tears. "Ethan, this is more than I ever imagined. Outweighs. It is not a gift," he said. "It is a promise. You once believed in me when I did not deserve it. Now I want to believe in others the same way." She touched his hand, her voice quiet. "You already do." As the sun dipped below the horizon, the lights from the new center began to glow behind them. Children laughed in the distance. The city breathed with life. And for the first time, Maya realized their story had become something much bigger than love. It had become a legacy, one born not from contracts or wealth, but from two people who chose to turn a broken beginning into something that could outlive them both. Ethan looked at her and whispered, "We started with a deal, but we ended with forever." And as the waves shimmered beneath the setting sun, Maya smiled and said, "Forever sounds just right." Autumn arrived with a crisp wind and golden leaves swirling through the streets of Chicago. It had been 1 year since the opening of the new Heart Foundation Center, and the city now knew Maya Lopez and Ethan Cole not as a charity founder and a millionaire, but as a team, two hearts that had turned a business deal into a story of change. That evening, the foundation hosted its first anniversary gala. The hall was filled with music, laughter, and stories of lives that had been rebuilt because of their work. Photographs of students, families, and community workers lined the walls' faces that carried hope instead of struggle. Maya stood backstage watching the crowd. Ethan joined her quietly, adjusting his tie. "You know," he said with a small smile, "this looks a lot different from our first gala." She laughed softly. "The first one started with a lie." He nodded. "And this one begins with truth." When they stepped onto the stage, the audience rose in applause. Ethan spoke first, his voice steady and sincere. "A year ago, this was just an idea, a way to give back what I had once taken for granted. But today, it is proof that kindness is not weakness. It is the strongest currency we have." Maya followed, her tone gentle but full of strength. "We all start somewhere. I was once just a girl scanning groceries, wondering if anyone would ever see me. Today, I know that being seen begins with believing in yourself and in others." Lol. The crowd cheered, and for a moment, Ethan looked at her with quiet pride. The spotlight glowed around them, and everything else faded away. Later that night, after the event ended, they returned to the quiet garden behind the foundation. The air was cool, and the city lights shimmered in the distance. Ethan reached into his coat and pulled out a small frame. Inside was the silver spoon Maya had used to stir his coffee on their first morning together. The engraving read, "Our beginning, never forget to breathe." He handed it to her gently. "I thought it belonged here, where everything started again." Maya smiled, tears forming in her eyes. "You kept it all this time?" "Of course," he said softly. "It reminds me that love, like breathing, only works when it is shared." She leaned against him, resting her head on his shoulder. The world felt quiet, steady, and complete. As the wind rustled through the leaves, Ethan whispered, "We built this life from a contract." Maya looked up at him, her eyes warm. "No, Ethan, we built it from a promise." They stood together under the fading lights, surrounded by the sound of laughter drifting from the building behind them. It was no longer just their story. It was a testament that even the most unlikely beginnings could lead to something true. And as the camera of memory faded to black, one final line lingered in the air. "Some marriages start with a contract, but the ones that last are written by the heart."